Senggol was a game that was originally created in a prison institution in the island of Java, Indonesia. This ancient sport was developed in the colonial era during the Dutch invasion in the 17th century. At the time, the Dutch had set up temporary prisons, but the growing number of captured soldiers meant that the prisons that housed them were overpopulated. This overcrowding led to the prisoners having to fight for sleeping space as well as roaming space. This led to the decision of having the prisoners tied up whenever large groups were to be moved from one area to another. This meant that when meal breaks occurred, the prisoners had to have their hands restrained prior to being sent to the meal room. As there was not an abundance of food provided for the prisoners at the time, due to a lack of supply, the prisoners became slightly more agitated during this time, and even with their hands restrained, would nonetheless aggressively attempt to push each other out of the way. Some guards noticed this, and in an effort to amuse themselves, they had decided to have the prisoners push each other out of the way to see who would last. They had the idea of having this competition at the corner of the rooftop. Due to the overpopulation of the jail, this meant that if a prisoner was bumped off, they would fall over the edge, and thus there would be one less prisoner to house. This was how the triangular shape of the ring was developed. The guards realised that they had made a somewhat substantial betting operation from this, and they decided to replace the location of the matches from the rooftop to the basement of the prison. This way, prisoners who showed a promising talent for the game would have a chance to play in more matches. This proved to be a success as the betting scene thrived and grew stronger. It did not take long before the game had spread to other penitentiaries, and towards the mid-17th century, most of the prisoners in Java held annual competitions for the game. At this point, the game was still kept as an isolated activity, and guards were reluctant to openly comment on it, although most had known about the ins and outs of the whole operation. In the late 1700s, a Dutch guard by the name of Ken Mekken was made commanding officer of one of the biggest prisons in Jakarta. Coincidentally, he was also head of the betting ring in his prison, and he knew the game inside out. Upon his retirement from the prison, he moved back to his native Holland, taking the idea of the game with him. He found it hard to adjust to a domestic routine, and missed the betting scene back at his prison, so he decided to teach some of the local amateur boxers the techniques to the game. The first bumping match took place in Mekken's shelter in 1779. The game became significantly popular, and Mekken's betting business flourished. This underground movement had a strong following in Mekken city, and soon after, the entire country. Not long after, there was a formidable request from the citizens of Holland to make the game a legalised sport in Europe, and in 1781 this bumping sport, or rather Senggol, became an official sport, and Holland was the first to hold an official match approved by the Sporting Federation.